Story 1, The Manhattan Van Incident, Full Detail, ***. So, just to clarify, I absolutely despise Halloween. I don't harbor ill will toward those who enjoy it, I'm not a total Grinch. But every year, when those garish decorations start going up and the fun-sized bags of candy appear in every store aisle, I am immediately reminded of something deeply disturbing that I have spent years trying to erase from my memory. I used to live in a modest studio apartment right in the heart of Greenwich Village, NYC. My life outside of work and the gym was largely spent sitting at my computer. My desk was positioned directly next to a large window on my left, and often, I would find myself gazing out, watching the incredible, chaotic flow of city life below. I wasn't a voyeur, it was more like passive people watching, wondering where everyone was going and what kind of complex lives they were leading. I watched students walk around in their fashionable coats, saw the incoming wave of NYU undergrads moving in every September with their possessions piled onto hand trucks. And then, around the end of October, depending on the exact date, I'd see the trick-or-treating kids in their costumes, parading down the sidewalks and proudly comparing their candy hauls. Despite my current bitter feelings toward the holiday, I genuinely used to love it. I would always carve a small, miniature pumpkin to place on my windowsill and hang a modest, Happy Halloween, banner above it. I'd always put a large bowl of assorted candy near the front door, leaving a sign encouraging kids to help themselves. It quickly became one of my favorite times of the entire year. I would sometimes spend the first hour after dark standing by the window with a cup of coffee, just checking out the creativity of the costumes that year. Back in 1998, the cultural atmosphere was completely dominated by Titanic. The film had made an enormous impact that summer, so I knew I would be seeing a lot of elaborate Jack and Rose couples or miniature sailors walking around. But the night itself went beyond anything I had anticipated. It felt like an endless procession of movie-inspired costumes, occasionally broken up by the usual suspects, classic vampires, shambling zombies, and, of course, the ever-present Ghostface from the Scream era. That year, though, the elaborate pop culture costumes dominated the streets of the village. It was perhaps around 7 p.m. I had finished my window watching and was back at my desk, getting a jump start on some boring, repetitive work prep. Since my attention was wandering, I caught sight of a group of trick-or-treaters passing by my window. Out of sheer habit, I turned to check them out. I was surprised to see a group of 4 kids, maybe around 11 or 12 years old, and not a single movie-themed costume among them. There was a surprisingly detailed cowboy, a classic pointy hat witch, and 2 who were dressed as the iconic band Kiss. The one who really caught my attention was the boy dressed as the demon from Kiss, complete with the black tank top, heavy platform boots, and immaculate face paint. I thought to myself, how did a kid manage to get so much detail into that outfit? Then, right as I was admiring their dedicated effort, I saw a dark gray minivan pull slowly up and stop right next to the children. I couldn't clearly see the driver through the tinted glass, but I saw the kids stop and look over toward the window where the driver was clearly talking to them. Seconds later, the driver got out of his seat, slammed the door shut, and walked around to the large double doors at the back of the van. The children, looking curious, followed him. The man was speaking animatedly, pointing toward the rear of his vehicle, clearly trying to persuade them of something. The man looked utterly generic, completely unremarkable. But as he stood there, talking and pointing, I was hit with a sudden, overwhelming, and terrible feeling, that something genuinely awful was about to happen. I guess it was how cartoonishly suspicious the scene looked, like it was ripped directly from a clumsy, stranger danger, PSA. But that unsettling familiarity is also what gave me pause. I didn't know who this guy was, but maybe those kids did. It was entirely possible that he was the parent or uncle of one of them, there to pick up the group after they finished trick-or-treating. There were also 4 children and only 1 adult. Unless he was some kind of highly trained ninja, he wouldn't be able to throw all 4 into the back of a van, and it was unlikely he was dumb enough to even attempt it. Furthermore, this was right at the side of a busy street in a well-lit area, with apartments and houses right there, and cars occasionally driving past. Unless this guy was a total maniac, I couldn't imagine him trying to abduct 4 kids in such a visible, high-traffic place. But no matter how hard I tried to mentally rationalize what I was witnessing, no matter how many times I told myself I was being paranoid or a scaredy cat, I simply could not shake the feeling that something was terrifyingly wrong. I managed to talk myself down a little bit, mentally at least. But when the man fully opened up the rear doors of his van and seemed to be showing something to those children inside, I finally turned in my chair and picked up my desk phone, my finger hovering over 911. There was still that insistent voice in my head saying, he's not going to grab one of them. He can't. You're just being paranoid. A part of me was utterly convinced he was going to drive off without any incident, and I would turn back to my chair feeling like a complete idiot. But there was another, far more compelling, and competing voice, one that urgently screamed, get ready to make a note of that license plate. Then, just as I suspected, the unspeakable happened. As the kid in the demon makeup stepped forward, leaning in as if trying to get a closer look at whatever was in the back, the man pounced in what seemed like a single, devastatingly fluid motion. The man immediately picked the boy clean off his feet and dragged him inside the van. The boy's 3 friends instantly turned tail and ran off screaming. As I hit 911 and brought the phone to my ear, I scrambled to get an angle so I could read the van's license plate. It took off so fast I wasn't able to read all of it, but I told the dispatcher everything I had just seen and was able to describe the man and his van in considerable detail. The dispatcher, a calm woman, said she had officers en route and that I should try to relax because the police would do everything they could. That calm professionalism managed to soothe me a little at the time, but the true answer was right there: if the cops really did do everything they could, it was tragically not nearly enough. The first missing persons poster went up just a couple of days later. Every single time I saw one, the bright, desperate flyer with the boy's picture, obviously one from happier times, it was agony. Thinking that he might never be that happy again just about killed me, because I had seen the exact moment that changed his life forever. I don't know if he was ever found. I desperately hope he was, but a part of me believes that he remained missing and was eventually declared dead. I later read that, statistically, a child goes missing in America every 40 seconds, and that almost 500,000 are reported missing every year. Most are returned home, having simply wandered off or gotten lost. But a large percentage of those who go missing are never reunited with their families. I hope that wasn't the case for that boy. But on top of messing up my one chance to keep him safe, I got a front row seat to see pure evil leave its sickening mark on the world. #Story2, the Seattle farewell, full detail. When I was in 8th grade, with Halloween rapidly approaching, my middle school friends and I began discussing trick-or-treating. At the age of 13, we felt we were right on the precarious cutoff point for the tradition. We knew that once we reached high school, doing something as childish as dressing up would likely earn us very little candy and a whole lot of social ridicule. It dawned on us, quite suddenly, that 2005 would likely be our last year ever trick-or-treating. I won't bore you with a long, poetic diatribe about the pain of growing up and putting away childish things, but I mean it when I say we were all devastated. That realization only motivated us to go all out with our costumes to truly make that final night of candy mining one we would never forget. I didn't have the height to pull off a character like Gandalf, so I settled on a bizarre, over-the-top Willy Wonka costume, consisting of a borrowed velvet jacket, purple slacks, and a towering top hat. My buddy Marcus dressed as Captain Jack Sparrow, which was easily the best costume because he had all the merchandise and the perfect look to make it seem completely legitimate. Then our 2 other friends, Daniel and Ben, came as SpongeBob SquarePants and a surprisingly aggressive-looking Viking, respectively. Ben, as the Viking, had painted his entire head and face with mud-colored paint, and though he was skinny, he looked fierce. He definitely earned a gold star for the sheer effort. We all met at my house in the quiet, upscale Capitol Hill neighborhood of Seattle around 5:30 p.m. After putting on some last-minute touches, my mom grabbed her ancient digital camera and snapped a picture for posterity. That photograph is now something I deeply cherish. We look so young and incredibly happy, but there's a distinct sense of naivety about us, too, because little did we know, this was the very last time we would all be together in the same place at the same time. We just didn't know it yet. We headed out onto the streets around 6 p.m. While Halloween was always a significant event in our neighborhood, that year it felt extra special. Entire platoons of costumed children were being led up and down the sidewalks by their adult chaperones, and almost every single front lawn was trying to outspook its neighbors with increasingly extravagant decorations. If our goal was candy, then business was booming. People were so impressed with the detail of our group costumes that wherever we went, we'd receive at least a handful or two of goodies. We covered almost the entire neighborhood in just under 2 hours. But even when we had probably hit every single house we could, and we had enough candy to last us until Thanksgiving, we still didn't feel like calling it quits. We wandered the streets, admiring the other costumes and the elaborate lawn decorations, talking loudly about all the cool horror movies our parents wouldn't let us see for another 3 or 4 years. That pure, unadulterated feeling of freedom and excitement we had that night is still something I appreciate about Halloween, even after all these years. But it's a holiday that now comes hand in hand with a host of profoundly unhappy memories, all because of what happened between 8:30 and 8:45 that night. Since Daniel and Ben lived outside of Capitol Hill, their parents were due to pick them up from my place at 9 p.m. sharp. So, right around 8:30, Daniel suggested that we make our way back so they wouldn't leave their rides waiting. Marcus seemed visibly bummed out that we were calling it a night, but we were all disappointed because we knew what it meant. It was the last time we'd all get to spend a night out purely as kids. In another year, we'd be young adults, as they called it, and things were irreversibly changing. I felt it, and we all felt it, and it absolutely sucked. I didn't give Marcus's bad mood a second thought until we reached the usual spot where we parted ways, and he just kept following us back toward my house. I figured he might have been trying to catch a ride with Daniel or Ben, but when I asked him, Marcus said he wasn't planning on going home yet. He insisted there had to be some more houses that still have candy, and he explained that he wanted to get his last piece of Halloween candy ever, like some kind of ceremonial thing to formally end our childhood. I thought that was a touching idea. But then Marcus asked if I'd head back out with him once Daniel and Ben had gotten their rides home. I was pretty beat. I wanted to chill, eat some of my haul, and see if there was anything genuinely scary on TV. Besides, we had school in the morning, and I didn't want to stay up too late. Marcus was typically a relaxed, reasonable kid. But on this occasion, he did not react well to me declining his offer. He snapped, "Dude, are you for real? This is our last Halloween ever, and you're just going to sit on your ass and watch TV?" I told him I was tired. Even Daniel piped up, "Yeah, dude. How much candy do you need?" But Marcus stubbornly insisted. He said it would only take like 30 minutes more. But then it was my turn to insist, especially on the fact that people wouldn't appreciate us knocking on their doors after 9 p.m. We started arguing, but then Marcus cut it short to say, "Fine, whatever. If you're going to be a nothing, I can do about it." This was strange behavior for Marcus. I saw it. Daniel and Ben saw it, too. At the time, I figured Marcus was just emotionally resistant to the night ending. But these days, I think it was an alarming sign of what was to come, and we just couldn't recognize it yet. As Marcus abruptly marched off, I yelled after him, asking where he was headed. He mentioned a quiet residential street that we hadn't covered, maybe 15 minutes walk away. After Daniel and Ben exchanged bewildered looks, we went inside to revel in our candy haul before their parents showed up. That night, after I'd managed to catch a little of the original Halloween movie on TV, I went upstairs and hit the hay. I thought about Marcus, knocking on those doors alone. I figured I'd see him the next morning at school, boasting, "Dude, you missed out big time." But the next day, I woke up to a text message Marcus had sent just after midnight. All it said was, "Hello, meat pliers. Asterisk asterisk." I thought, asterisk what the hell? Hello, meat pliers. Asterisk I texted back immediately, saying, LOL, what the hell does that mean? Since we should have both been getting ready for school around that time, I figured I wouldn't have to wait long for a reply. But Marcus never texted back. I caught up with Daniel and Ben over lunch. Neither of them had spoken to Marcus that morning. We figured the weird message was just Marcus's strange idea of a joke. I had to wait until after school to call him. After getting a voicemail a few times, Marcus's mom finally answered the phone. She told me he was sick. My first thought was something like, stupid idiot ate so much candy that he made himself sick. I texted the others to let them know, and we figured we'd see him the coming Monday once his critical blood sugar level had lowered. But he didn't show up then, either. I tried calling him again, but his phone was off. Then, when I tried his home number, his mom told me he was still sick and resting. I might have been 13, but I wasn't completely naive. I still believed Marcus was ill in some way, but I also had the nagging feeling that there was something his mom wasn't telling me, and that there was more to it than just some childhood illness. I brought up my suspicions with Daniel and Ben at school, and by that point, they were also starting to think that something was genuinely going on. We hadn't heard from Marcus all weekend, and we still hadn't spoken to him by Tuesday. I figured that whatever was happening at home, it wasn't something he wanted to talk about. The best thing we could do was give him space and wait until he truly needed us to be his friends. Wednesday was the only day I didn't call or text Marcus, only because of what Daniel said about respecting his space. But it sucked. I felt like I was losing a friend. The next day, Thursday, I rode my bike over to Marcus's place and called his cell from outside where I could clearly see his bedroom window. I figured it would be like all the other times, it would either ring out or be switched off. But for the first time in days, Marcus actually picked up the phone. I waited for him to say hello or ask what I wanted, but he didn't say a single thing. He just sort of stayed silent until I asked, Marcus, are you there? He still didn't speak, but I could hear him breathing. He did the exact same thing when I asked if he was okay. He didn't say a damned word. He just listened to me, and then he hung up. In those first few moments after he hung up, I was heartbroken. I didn't realize it at the time, but something much larger and far more sinister was unfolding. In that moment, all I could think was that he simply didn't want to be friends with me anymore. I figured I'd screwed up one of my best childhood friendships because I preferred to eat candy and watch movies, and it made me feel like an utter failure. I didn't know what else to do, so I tried calling him again. But when I felt a lump forming in my throat, I hit end call, because I didn't want to sound emotional while talking to him. Then, right as I looked up at his window one last time, I saw the curtain begin to twitch. Someone took hold of the edge and, after peeling it back, I saw Marcus looking out from the darkness of his bedroom. Only, he didn't actually look like Marcus anymore. Even from down in his driveway, I could see how pale and gaunt he looked. It was like his first time seeing the world outside. He looked all around at first, scanning for something. And then, his big, blank eyes locked directly on me. I raised a hand, intending to wave, but I remember stopping short and just holding my hand up to see if he'd react. He didn't. He just stared at me, unblinking, and then he disappeared behind the curtain again. I remember just sitting there on my bike seat, staring up at Marcus's window in a kind of daze. In the space of just a couple of minutes, I went from being worried to heartbroken to just straight up terrified. Whatever was happening to Marcus was serious. I could tell that much from the horrifying way he looked. You can call it intrusive if you want, but I was determined to find out what it was. I tried everything I could think of. I tried calling him repeatedly. I tried talking to his mom, and I even got my own mother to call her, thinking that she might tell another grown-up the truth about what was really going on. But all Marcus's mom would say was some variation of, he's sick, he's getting bed rest, and he'll be out of school until he's well again. It was only then that I brought up Marcus's "Hello meet pliers" text message. Mom gave Marcus's family another call, maybe a week after the first. I figured that she might finally get an update of some kind. Well, she did get an update. And the update was that Marcus and his family were suddenly leaving town. When she told me, she gently suggested that there was a chance Marcus had stopped talking to us, to me, Daniel, and Ben, because he was upset about the move. She said that people handle stuff like that in weird ways, and that sometimes people choose to ignore their emotions instead of confronting them. I asked why Marcus's mom would lie like that and say he was sick. She told me that parents protect their kids by any means necessary sometimes, and that a small white lie sometimes spares a whole lot of heartache. But it wasn't a small white lie. I'd seen his face. Whatever was going on with Marcus, I knew it was serious. Mom said that I'd come to accept it as time moved on, but it didn't, and I never have. I think something truly awful happened to Marcus that night he went off trick-or-treating on his own. And I think it was so bad that he and his family either chose to leave town or just straight up had to. I tried looking him up on social media a while back, but he doesn't seem to exist online. I thought enough time might have passed that he'd be willing to talk about it, but I couldn't find him anywhere. Sometimes I think about that weird text message he sent. And in my darkest moments I think he typed, "Hello, meet Pliers," because he was using predictive text in a state of utter, terrified frenzy. And what he'd really meant to text was, "Help me, please." ****. Hashtag Story 3, The Haunting of Hollywood Hills, full detail. One of the most significant and chilling events of my entire childhood happened on Halloween. A few friends and I were out trick-or-treating in the very wealthy, sprawling neighborhoods of Beverly Hills, Los Angeles. We actually went pretty much to every neighborhood within walking distance. On the way back, we found ourselves wandering past a place of almost legendary, mythical status within our social circle. For as long as any of us could remember, there was this old, imposing house in the neighborhood over from us, one that was close to other multi-million-dollar homes, but strangely disconnected by large, overgrown front yards and a fairly long, winding driveway. We never saw anyone home, we never saw any cars parked out front, and we never saw anyone either coming or going. We were pretty sure it was abandoned in some capacity, that someone owned it but never bothered to visit or maintain it. But what we were 100% certain of is that the place was haunted. If you saw the place at 13, you'd probably think it was haunted too. Even if you saw the place at 30, you'd likely still be convinced it had a resident ghost or two. It looked like the archetypal haunted house, all old and gothic, with sharp angles and darkened windows, the kind of place the Addams family would choose to live. Naturally, a bunch of hyper-imaginative 13-year-olds were convinced there were long-dead spirits wandering the gloomy halls. As we walked past, we all went quiet, just checking the place out, before our buddy Jason slowed down to a stop. This huge, mischievous grin came over his face, I remember. He then said, ***, how much candy are you going to give me if I knock on that door?" We were all thinking, **dude, there's no way you're about to knock on that door." But Jason immediately bet his entire bag of candy that he would actually do it. Suddenly, none of us were willing to take his bet because he was clearly very serious about playing ding-dong ditch on this legendary haunted house. I still had my doubts, though. When I bet him a handful of candy that he wouldn't do it, our two other friends, Mitch and Kevin, quickly did the same. Once the bets were officially in, off goes Jason, bold as brass, down that crumbling driveway. We watched him walk up the driveway, pretty skeptical and doubtful. When he finally got to the door, Jason looked back at us. He was trying hard to be brave and not show any fear. But even from all the way down the driveway, we could see how nervous he really was. I remember Mitch whispering, "I told you he wouldn't do it." I guess Jason heard him. Because right after that comment, Jason raised his fist and knocked hard on that door. One of us actually gasped, I remember. I no longer cared about the candy, Jason had just hammered on the door of the haunted house. We all watched in a strained silence as he backed away from the door, turning his body as if he was about to bolt. But not only did the door not open, but nothing moved and nothing stirred inside. The house stayed dark and incredibly quiet. The longer it did, the more Jason's confidence started to build. He stopped. Instead of walking back down the driveway toward us, he walked right back to the front door of the house and knocked for a second time. He did it even louder that time and with a kind of playful, challenging rhythm to the knocks. We were laughing among ourselves by that point, mainly at just how brazen Jason was being. Once he heard and saw us laughing, that only spurred him on more. When he knocked a third time and started yelling out, "Hello? Anyone home?" We thought it was absolutely hilarious. I guess it was all that tension being relieved, the realization that our fears about that place had been completely unfounded. Jason started yelling about how if a ghost didn't appear to give him a treat, he was about to give them a trick they'd regret. Then he yelled that he was going to come back with holy water and sprinkle it all over the place so the ghosts couldn't live there anymore. We were falling over laughing by the time he got to that part. Mitch finally managed to yell, "All right, brother. You won. Come get your candy. Let's get going." But Jason wasn't done. He started dancing right on the porch, singing the Ghostbusters theme song, "I ain't afraid of no ghosts." We were literally about to fall over from laughing so hard. Then, just as I looked up, sides hurting from laughing, I saw the door behind Jason suddenly swing open. All three of us stopped laughing instantly. Jason spun around just in time for this tall, terrifying, shadowy figure to come lunging toward him and snatch him up. Jason let out a raw, desperate scream, but it was no good. This person dragged him back into the house before slamming the door closed. Then there was a terrifying silence again. The moment that door slammed, the three of us went running back down the driveway while yelling Jason's name. It was pure instinct, something propelling us to try and help our friend. But that front door was closed and locked. Since busting into the house some other way seemed insane, we knew the only thing to do was to go get help. We ran to the door of a house nearby, just banging on it until some angry-looking adult opened it up. We all started yelling together in this chaotic explosion of begging and pleading. I guess all the man needed to see were the looks on our faces to know that we weren't just a bunch of loud trick-or-treaters anymore. I remember he ran inside, called the police, told us to all calm down, and then asked one of us to explain in a few coherent words what had just happened so he could relay all that information to the dispatcher. We were still freaking out, begging him to hurry, but the guy kept telling us to shut up so he could hear the operator. We then waited in the man's front yard with him until we heard the sirens. We ran back over to the haunted house as the LAPD pulled up, desperately begging them to go help Jason. The cops ran up to the driveway, told us to stay back, and then banged on the door while we watched. I remember Kevin yelling, "Kick the door open. He's in there. Kick the door open." But the cops wouldn't do that right away. We thought we were going to have to wait minutes, and those were minutes we didn't think Jason had. So we started freaking out all over again. The officers just banged on the door again, saying, "Police, open up." It was agonizing, thinking Jason was going through God knows what, while the cops were just knocking on the door. But then, right after they'd knocked that last time, the door swung open again. And out stepped a man with Jason right at his side. We weren't close enough to hear what was said to the cops, but we could see Jason just standing there, either nodding or shaking his head every time the cops directed a question to him. That went on for a minute or two as we stayed quiet, fully expecting the man to be arrested at any moment. But he wasn't. The cops didn't even touch their cuffs. After another minute or two of talking, the guy walked back inside what was by then a well-lit hallway and shut the door again. The cops walked Jason up the driveway toward us. We were still in this sort of stunned silence, unable to comprehend how that grabber hadn't been arrested. But then, as they got close, one of the cops was saying something like, "Lucky that gentleman was home to help your friend out, but things could have been much worse." "What the hell are you talking about?" Mitch yelled, and he started explaining that Jason had been grabbed and pulled in. But then the cop basically told us not to make up tales like that, and that they knew we were trying to play some kind of prank on that place because the person wouldn't give us any candy. We didn't know what he was talking about at first, but when it clicked that the man who had grabbed Jason had somehow tricked the police, Mitch got incredibly angry, saying that's not what happened. He tried explaining the whole thing to the cops from start to finish. But then Jason turned to him and said, ***, dude, we shouldn't make up stuff like that. It's not cool. We were stunned into utter silence. All we could do was stare at Jason, thinking, ***, what the hell's gotten into you? ***, the cops told us it was time to go home. And if they saw us out on the street again causing trouble, they'd drive us all home personally with some very stern warnings for our parents. Really scary stories, every day. Subscribe, like if you like, turn on the bell so you don't miss new videos.